Sophia clutched the cream-colored invitation card in her trembling hands, reading the elegant gold lettering for the 5th time. Her name, Sophia Martinez, was handwritten in perfect calligraphy. The card invited her to attend the annual charity gala hosted by Richard Harrington, the tech billionaire whose name appeared on buildings throughout the city, including the main hall at her school. This has to be a mistake, she whispered to herself. Tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear, Sophia stood in the modest apartment she shared with her father, the invitation seeming completely out of place against the backdrop of their simple furniture and second-hand belongings. Her father, Luis, walked in from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel. "What's that you're reading, Mia?" he asked, his face showing the weariness of a long day's work. Sophia hesitated before answering. "It's an invitation to Mr. Harrington's charity gala this weekend." She paused. "The same one you're working at?" Luis's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "How did you get that?" "They were handing them out to some students at school today. I think they made a mistake and gave me one," she replied, biting her lower lip. "The student council president said something about including scholarship students for diversity." Luis's expression softened. He sat down beside her on their worn sofa. "That's not a mistake, Sophia. You earned your place at that school with your brains and hard work. You deserve to be invited to fancy parties just as much as anyone else." Sophia looked down at the invitation again. "But I have nothing to wear. And you know those people will just stare at me like I'm some kind of, I don't know, charity case." "Those people," Luis said gently, "include me serving drinks and clearing plates." He smiled. "Maybe we can both feel out of place together. Besides, it might be fun to see how the other half lives, no?" Sophia couldn't help but smile back. Her father always knew how to make light of their situation. She thought about how he worked 2 jobs as the maintenance supervisor at her elite preparatory academy during the day and taking on extra evening shifts at events like this gala to make ends meet. "I guess I could go," she said hesitantly. "At least I'd get to see you." "That's my girl," Luis replied, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "And don't worry about what to wear. I've been saving a little something for a special occasion." 2 days later, Sophia found herself wearing a simple but elegant blue dress that her father had somehow managed to afford. It wasn't designer like what the other girls would be wearing, but it fit her perfectly and made her feel beautiful. Luis had explained that he'd been putting aside small amounts for months, knowing that occasions like this might come up as Sophia progressed through her prestigious school. "You look just like your mother," he had whispered when she emerged from her room, and Sophia treasured those words more than any expensive gown. Now, standing at the entrance to Harrington Estate, Sophia felt her confidence wavering again. The mansion loomed before her, its windows glowing with warm light that spilled onto the perfectly manicured lawn. Luxury cars pulled up one after another, depositing guests in designer clothes dripping with jewelry. Sophia took a deep breath and handed her invitation to the doorman, half expecting him to tell her there had been a mistake after all. But he merely nodded and directed her inside with a practiced smile. The foyer alone was bigger than their entire apartment, with a crystal chandelier that seemed to float overhead like a constellation of stars. Soft classical music drifted through the air, mingling with the quiet murmur of conversation and the occasional burst of polite laughter. Sophia scanned the room, feeling increasingly out of place. She recognized some of her classmates, but they were busy in their own social circles, looking perfectly at ease among the adults. None of them acknowledged her presence. She spotted her father across the room, dressed in a server's uniform carrying a tray of champagne flutes. Their eyes met briefly, and he gave her an encouraging wink before turning to offer drinks to a group of guests. Sophia slipped along the edges of the room, trying to blend into the background. She found a quiet corner near a large window and stood there, watching the socialites mingle. From her vantage point, she could observe the entire ballroom, the string quartet playing in one corner, the elaborate ice sculptures decorating the buffet table, and the host himself, Richard Harrington, holding court in the center of it all. Harrington was younger than she had expected, perhaps in his early 40s, with sharp features and an air of supreme confidence. He wore his wealth like a second skin, effortlessly commanding attention with every gesture. Sophia noticed how people gravitated toward him, laughing too loudly at his jokes, nodding eagerly at his opinions. "Not joining the party?" a voice suddenly asked beside her. Sophia turned to find a woman in her 30s with kind eyes and a simple but obviously expensive black dress. She wasn't dripping with jewels like many of the other guests, but she carried herself with quiet dignity. "I'm just observing," Sophia replied cautiously. The woman smiled. "A fellow observer. I'm Lena, Richard's sister." Sophia's eyes widened slightly. "I'm Sophia. I go to Westlake Academy. I'm on scholarship," she added. Not sure why she felt compelled to explain her presence. "Ah, Westlake. Excellent school," Lena nodded. "And you must be very bright to have earned a scholarship there." Before Sophia could respond, a commotion near the center of the room caught their attention. Harrington had climbed a few steps up the grand staircase and was tapping his champagne glass with a spoon. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice rang out, silencing the room, "thank you all for coming tonight. Your generosity will help fund our foundation's work for another year." He paused for the applause. "But charity shouldn't be all business and no pleasure. I thought we might enjoy some entertainment before dinner." Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. "My pride and joy," Harrington continued, gesturing toward a gleaming black grand piano that Sophia hadn't noticed before. It sat on a slightly raised platform near the staircase. A Steinway concert grand, once played by the legendary Vladimir Horowitz himself. "Would anyone care to demonstrate their musical talents for our gathering?" The room fell quiet. A few nervous laughs broke the silence, but no volunteers stepped forward. "Come now," Harrington pressed, his smile never wavering. "Surely among our accomplished guests someone plays. What about our young people? I know Westlake has an excellent music program." Sophia instinctively took a small step backward, trying to make herself even less visible. Some of her classmates exchanged uncomfortable glances, but none moved forward. "No takers?" Harrington's eyes swept the room and, to Sophia's horror, landed directly on her. "What about you, young lady?" In the blue dress by the window, every head in the room turned to look at her. Sophia felt her cheeks burn as she stood frozen in place. I don't," she stammered. Harrington descended the stairs and walked toward her, the crowd parting before him. Up close, his smile seemed less genuine, a practiced expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Don't be shy," he insisted. "What's your name?" "Sophia Martinez," she answered quietly. Something flickered in Harrington's expression. "Martinez? Any relation to Luis Martinez?" Sophia nodded, her stomach tightening. "He's my father." "Ah," Harrington said, his voice taking on a different tone. He turned to address the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have Sophia Martinez with us tonight, daughter of my very capable maintenance supervisor." The way he emphasized her father's position made Sophia's skin crawl. This wasn't an introduction. It was a subtle way of putting her in her place, of highlighting that she didn't truly belong among the guests. "Perhaps Sophia would honor us with a performance," Harrington suggested, though it didn't sound like a request. He extended his hand toward the piano with a flourish. Sophia glanced desperately around the room looking for her father, but couldn't spot him among the servers moving through the crowd. Lena had disappeared as well. "I don't really play," Sophia protested weakly. "Nonsense," Harrington insisted. "Everyone at Westlake takes music appreciation, don't they? Surely you can play something simple. Chopsticks, perhaps." A few chuckles rose from the audience, and Sophia realized with a sinking feeling that this was entertainment, just not the kind Harrington had announced. He was amusing his guests at her expense, using her as an example of someone who didn't fit into their world. With no graceful way to refuse, Sophia allowed herself to be guided to the piano. Her legs felt wooden as she walked across the room, aware of every eye following her movement, every whisper behind manicured hands. The piano bench felt cold beneath her as she sat down. She stared at the gleaming keys, her reflection distorted in their polished surface. Behind her, she could feel the weight of expectations, the wealthy guests waiting for her to embarrass herself. Harrington standing with his self-satisfied smile, and somewhere in the room, her father who had worked so hard to give her opportunities. Sophia closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Her fingers hovered over the keys as she made her decision. Sophia placed her fingers on the piano keys, aware of the silence that had fallen over the room. The weight of everyone's stares pressed down on her shoulders. She could feel Richard Harrington standing just a few feet away, his smug smile almost tangible in the air between them. For a moment, Sophia considered playing something simple, maybe the basic scales she'd seen other students fumble through during music class. It would be enough to satisfy Harrington's cruel game without drawing more attention to herself. She could get through this humiliation quickly and retreat back to her corner, but then she thought of her father. Luis, who had worked extra shifts to buy her that blue dress. Luis, who cleaned these fancy people's messes without complaint. Luis, who had taught her that dignity wasn't something others could take from you, only something you could surrender. Sophia straightened her back and took a deep breath. Her fingers began to move across the keys, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence. The opening notes of Chopin's revolutionary etude filled the room, complex, passionate, and far beyond what anyone had expected. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Sophia didn't see it. Her eyes were closed now, her mind transported to the place she went when she played, the place where she wasn't the scholarship girl or the janitor's daughter, the place where only the music mattered. Her hands flew over the keyboard, drawing out the thundering bass notes and delicate melodies that had captivated audiences for centuries. The piece was technically demanding, with racing left-hand passages and dramatic emotional shifts. But Sophia played as if the piano were an extension of herself, her fingers finding each key with perfect precision. Harrington's smile had vanished. He stood frozen, champagne glass halfway to his lips, staring at Sophia with undisguised shock. Around him, guests who had been prepared to chuckle at her failure now watched in stunned silence, some even taking a few steps closer to the piano to better see this unexpected performance. In the kitchen doorway, Luis had appeared, drawn by the familiar music. He stood with a tray still in his hands, watching his daughter with shining eyes. Another server tried to nudge him back to work, then stopped, captivated by the performance as well. Sophia lost herself in the music, in the perfect feel of this magnificent instrument responding to her touch. Her modest keyboard at home, the one her father had rescued from a dumpster and repaired, had keys that stuck and sound quality that wavered, but she had practiced on it religiously, finding moments between homework and helping her father with chores. And on late evenings, when her father worked at the school, Sophia would sometimes slip into the empty music room. The music teacher, Mrs. Chen, had discovered her there once, playing in the dark. Instead of scolding her, she had simply turned on the lights and sat down to listen. After that, she had given Sophia a key, their secret arrangement allowing Sophia to practice on a real piano when the building was nearly empty. Now all those hours of practice poured out through her fingertips. Sophia reached the climax of the piece, her hands crossing over each other as the melody built to its powerful conclusion. When the final notes resonated through the room, she remained still for a moment, eyes still closed, savoring the perfect acoustics of the grand hall that made the final chord hang in the air like something alive. Then silence. Sophia opened her eyes, suddenly remembering where she was. The reality of the situation came rushing back. She was still at the charity gala, still surrounded by wealthy strangers, still the outsider. She braced herself for whatever would come next. What came was applause. It started with a single person clapping. Lena, Harrington's sister, standing at the back of the crowd with an expression of delight. Then others joined in, the applause swelling until it filled the room. Several guests rose to their feet, including an older man near the front who nodded approvingly as he stood. Sophia's cheeks flushed. She looked over at Harrington, unsure what to do. The billionaire's expression was unreadable, a complex mix of emotions playing across his features. Surprise, certainly. Embarrassment, perhaps. And something else Sophia couldn't identify. Extraordinary, a woman's voice called out. Absolutely extraordinary. Where did you study? Someone else asked. Are you performing anywhere currently? The questions came from all directions. Sophia stood up from the piano bench, feeling suddenly overwhelmed. I don't study anywhere, she answered softly. Not for piano, I mean. This statement caused another ripple of murmurs through the crowd. The older man who had stood during the applause made his way forward. He was elegantly dressed, with silver hair and a distinguished bearing. Young lady, he said, his voice carrying a slight accent Sophia couldn't place. That was remarkable. I am Professor Anton Petrov, director of the National Conservatory. I would very much like to speak with you about your musical education. Sophia blinked in surprise. The National Conservatory was one of the most prestigious music schools in the country. She had read about it in magazines, dreaming impossible dreams. There must be some mistake, Harrington finally spoke, his voice not quite as confident as before. Miss Martinez is a scholarship student at Westlake Academy. She's not a trained pianist. No mistake, Professor Petrov replied firmly. I have been teaching piano for 40 years, Mr. Harrington. I know talent when I hear it. He turned back to Sophia. How long have you been playing, my dear? Since I was 7, Sophia answered. My father found an old keyboard someone had thrown away. He fixed it for me. Luis had moved closer now, his pride visibly battling with his awareness that he was still on duty. He stood at the edge of the group, the tray now held against his chest like a shield. Professor Petrov noticed him. You are the father? You have a remarkable daughter, sir. Luis nodded, clearly moved but unsure how to respond in this setting. Thank you, he said simply. Another woman stepped forward, middle-aged with a camera hanging around her neck. I'm from the Tribune, she explained. We're covering the gala for the society pages. Would you mind if I took a photo and asked a few questions? This seems like the real story of the evening. Before Sophia could answer, Harrington stepped between them, his composure regained. Let's not overwhelm our young guest, he said smoothly. There will be plenty of time for interviews later. The dinner is about to be served. As if on cue, the doors to the dining room opened and servers began directing guests toward their tables. The crowd reluctantly began to move away, though many glanced back at Sophia with new interest. Miss Martinez, Harrington said quietly, once most guests had moved toward the dining room. I believe I owe you an apology. Sophia looked up at him, surprised. Up close, she could see something had shifted in his expression. The condescension was gone. I made assumptions, he continued. Incorrect ones, obviously. Please join us for dinner, as my personal guest. Sophia hesitated, then glanced at her father, who gave her a slight nod. Thank you, Mr. Harrington, she replied carefully, but I should tell you I wasn't assigned a seat. That won't be a problem, he assured her. You'll sit at my table. As they walked toward the dining room, Lena appeared beside them. That was quite something, she said to Sophia with a genuine smile. You certainly know how to make an entrance. I didn't mean to cause a scene, Sophia responded, still feeling a bit dazed by the turn of events, But the best scenes are the ones we don't plan, Lena replied with a wink. She turned to her brother. Richard, I'll make sure Sophia's father is relieved of his duties for the evening. He should join us as well. Harrington opened his mouth as if to object, then seemed to think better of it. Of course, he agreed. Mr. Martinez is welcome at our table. Sophia watched as Lena went to speak with the event manager, who looked confused but quickly complied with whatever instructions she gave. Moments later, Luis approached, having removed his server's jacket, though he still wore the black pants and white shirt beneath. Sophia, he whispered, taking her arm. What is happening? The manager told me I'm to join the guests for dinner. Apparently we're Mr. Harrington's special guest now, Sophia replied, still not quite believing it herself. After I played, everything changed. Luis looked concerned. Are you comfortable with this? We can leave if you want. Sophia considered it for a moment. Part of her wanted to run from all the attention, to retreat to the safety of their small apartment. But another part, the part that had chosen to play Chopin rather than chopsticks, wanted to see where this night might lead. Let's stay, she decided. At least for dinner. Luis squeezed her hand. I'm so proud of you, Mija. Your mother would be too. As they entered the dining room, heads turned to watch their progress to the main table. The same people who had barely noticed Sophia earlier now tracked her every move. Some smiled warmly. Others whispered behind their hands. Professor Petrov was already seated at Harrington's table, and his face brightened when he saw Sophia approach. Ah, excellent, he exclaimed. I was hoping we would have a chance to talk more. As Sophia took her seat, a place of honor near the head of the table, she caught sight of some of her classmates watching from other tables, their expressions ranging from surprise to envy. The same students who had never included her in their social circles now seemed desperate to catch her eye. Sophia smiled to herself as she unfolded her napkin. The night had certainly not gone as expected. She glanced at the piano across the room, still lit by a spotlight, and felt a strange sense of gratitude toward Harrington for his attempt to humiliate her. In trying to put her in her place, he had inadvertently helped her find it. Dinner was served, and as the conversation flowed around her, Sophia realized that for the first time since entering this mansion, She no longer felt like an outsider looking in. She had brought her own key to this world, not wealth or social connections, but something entirely her own. Dinner at the Billionaire's table was unlike anything Sophia had ever experienced. Crystal glasses caught the light from overhead chandeliers. Silverware gleamed against pristine white tablecloths, and servers moved with silent efficiency, appearing with new courses just as the previous ones were finished. Sophia tried to focus on the conversation around her, but she kept getting distracted by the sheer luxury of it all. The china plates alone probably cost more than her father's monthly salary. Speaking of her father, Louis sat beside her, looking both proud and uncomfortable as he carefully watched which fork others used before selecting his own. "So, Sophia," Professor Petrov said, leaning forward, "tell me about your musical education. Who was your teacher?" Sophia put down her spoon, the butternut squash soup momentarily forgotten. "I'm mostly self-taught," she admitted. "I watched videos online and borrowed books from the library." Professor Petrov's eyebrows shot up. "Remarkable. And the Chopin piece? How did you learn that?" "There's a music store downtown where they let people try the pianos. The owner, Mr. Wu, gave me some sheet music when he saw I was serious about learning. I practiced at home on my keyboard, and sometimes—" She glanced at her father, then continued, "Sometimes I used the piano at school when no one was around." Louise smiled softly. The music teacher found out and gave her permission. She said she'd never seen such determination. Harrington, who had been surprisingly quiet, finally spoke. "You have a gift, Miss Martinez. One that clearly transcends your circumstances." His tone wasn't unkind, but the words still carried an edge that made Sophia bristle. "Talent knows no economic boundaries, Richard," Lena interjected smoothly, "though opportunity often does." Professor Petrov nodded in agreement, which is precisely why the conservatory has a scholarship program. He turned to Sophia, his eyes bright with interest. "We hold auditions next month. I would very much like you to consider applying." Sophia nearly dropped her spoon. "The National Conservatory? But that's for exceptionally talented musicians," Professor Petrov finished for her. "Which you clearly are." "The tuition must be considerable," Louis said quietly, practical concerns evident in his voice. "For those who pay it, yes," the professor agreed. "But as I mentioned, we have scholarships for students of exceptional ability. Full scholarships covering not only tuition but living expenses as well." Sophia's heart began to race. The National Conservatory had been a distant dream, something she'd read about in music magazines but never seriously considered as a possibility for herself. I don't know what to say," she stammered. "Say you'll audition," Professor Petrov encouraged. "That's all I ask." "She'll need time to prepare," Louise pointed out, "and proper instruction. If she's going to compete against students who've had years of formal training, I could help with that," Harrington suddenly offered. The table fell silent, all eyes turning to him. He cleared his throat. "I mean, I could arrange for lessons. With the best teachers? Until the audition?" Sophia stared at him, suspicious of this sudden generosity. "Why would you do that?" Harrington looked momentarily taken aback by her directness. "Consider it an investment in talent. And perhaps," he hesitated, "a way to make amends for my earlier behavior." Before Sophia could respond, a commotion across the dining room caught everyone's attention. A tall, slender woman with perfect blonde hair and a dress that seemed to be made entirely of silver sequins was making her way toward their table. People turned to watch her progress, whispers following in her wake. "Oh dear," Lena murmured. "Vivian. Who's Vivian?" Sophia whispered back. "Richard's ex-wife," Lena explained quickly. "This should be interesting." Harrington's face had gone slightly pale. He stood as the woman approached. "Vivian," he greeted stiffly. "I wasn't aware you were in town." "Clearly," Vivian replied with a brittle smile. "My invitation must have gotten lost in the mail. Again." She surveyed the table, her gaze lingering on Sophia and Louise. "New charity cases, Richard? How noble of you." Sophia felt her father stiffen beside her. Under the table, she placed a hand on his arm, silently urging him to stay calm. "Vivian," Harrington said, his voice dropping to a warning tone. "This is neither the time nor the place. It never is with you," she shot back. "But don't worry, I'm not staying. I just came to deliver some news in person." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "The board voted this morning." I'm the new chairperson of the Harrington Foundation. Harrington's face darkened. That's impossible. The board wouldn't what? Vivian cut in. Listen to reason. Recognize that your recent investments have been questionable at best? Or perhaps you thought they wouldn't notice the 10 million you diverted to that ridiculous lunar project. She shook her head. You may control the company, Richard, but the foundation is another matter. The tension at the table was palpable. Sophia glanced around, noticing that other guests were pretending not to listen while clearly hanging on every word. We'll discuss this later, Harrington said through clenched teeth. Nothing to discuss, Vivian replied airily. It's done. Oh, and since I'm in charge now, I've decided to redirect our educational funding. No more scholarships to Westlake Academy. We'll be focusing on environmental initiatives instead. Sophia felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. The scholarship program at Westlake was funded by the Harrington Foundation. If that funding disappeared, you can't do that, Harrington argued. Those scholarships are established. There are students counting on them. Watch me, Vivian challenged, then turned on her heel and walked away, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. Harrington sank back into his chair, looking genuinely shaken. I apologize for that unpleasantness, he said after a moment. My ex-wife has a flair for the dramatic. The scholarship program, Sophia began hesitantly. Is she serious about cutting it? Harrington ran a hand over his face. Unfortunately, if she has the board's backing, yes. She's been trying to wrestle control of the foundation from me for years. But that would affect dozens of students, Sophia pressed. Not just me, kids who have no other way to attend Westlake. I'm aware, Harrington replied, a note of genuine regret in his voice. And I will do everything in my power to prevent it. But Vivian is determined. The remainder of the dinner passed in a blur for Sophia. The conversation eventually moved on to lighter topics, but she couldn't stop thinking about what she'd heard. Her scholarship was potentially in jeopardy, and not just hers, but those of all the other students who couldn't afford Westlake's steep tuition. As dessert was being served, Sophia noticed her father check his watch. Dad? She questioned quietly. I should get back to work, he explained softly. They're short-staffed tonight. But Mr. Harrington said, I know what he said. Louise interrupted gently. But I still have responsibilities. And I don't take charity, Mia. You know that. Before Sophia could argue, Louise stood and excused himself politely from the table. Harrington looked surprised but nodded in acknowledgement. Your father is a man of principle, Lena commented after Louise had gone. Yes, Sophia agreed, watching him disappear through the kitchen doors. He always says our integrity is the one thing no one can take from us. Wise words, Professor Petrov remarked. Now about the audition. Would you be able to come to the conservatory next week? I'd like to show you around, give you a feel for the place before you make any decisions. The conversation shifted back to music, and Sophia found herself describing her practice routine, the pieces she'd taught herself and her dreams of someday performing professionally. As she spoke, she noticed Harrington watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between curiosity and calculation. When dinner concluded, guests began to drift back to the main hall for dancing and more drinks. Professor Petrov excused himself, promising to be in touch about the conservatory visit, and Lena was pulled away by other friends, leaving Sophia momentarily alone with Harrington. Miss Martinez, he began, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. About what my ex-wife said? It's okay, Sophia interrupted. It's not your fault. No, but I feel responsible. He paused, then continued more firmly. I want you to know that regardless of what happens with the foundation, your scholarship at Westlake is secure. I'll see to it personally. Sophia was taken aback by this declaration. Thank you, but what about the others? Harrington looked surprised by the question. The others? The other scholarship students, Sophia clarified. There are 17 of us at Westlake, all from families that could never afford the tuition. A flash of something like shame crossed Harrington's face. I wasn't aware of the exact number. Well, now you are, Sophia replied simply. She stood up from the table. Thank you for dinner, Mr. Harrington, and for the offer of lessons. I'll think about it. She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. You're not what I expected, Sophia Martinez. Sophia looked back at him. People rarely are, Mr. Harrington, when you actually take the time to see them. She made her way through the crowd, feeling strangely empowered despite the uncertainties that now clouded her future. The night had been a roller coaster, from humiliation to triumph to this new complication with the scholarships. Yet somehow she felt more in control than when she'd arrived. Near the entrance, she spotted her father helping an elderly guest with her coat. He caught her eye and smiled, and Sophia felt a rush of love and gratitude for him. Whatever happened with Westlake or the conservatory or Richard Harrington, she knew her father would be there, supporting her dreams while teaching her to stand on her own. As Sophia waited for him to finish his shift, she found herself drawn back to the piano. The room had thinned out somewhat, with many guests now on the dance floor or gathered in smaller conversation groups. No one seemed to notice as she slipped onto the bench once more. This time, she didn't play Chopin. Instead, her fingers found the keys to a simpler melody, one her mother had supposedly sung to her as a baby. Sophia didn't remember her mother. She had died when Sophia was only 2. But somehow this tune had stayed with her, a ghost of a memory that felt like home. As the sweet, melancholy notes filled the air around her, Sophia closed her eyes and played not to impress anyone, but simply for the joy of the music itself. She didn't notice when Harrington paused in the doorway listening. She didn't see the thoughtful expression that crossed his face or the way he quietly slipped away, already reaching for his phone. Some decisions had been made that night, though Sophia didn't know it yet. Some wheels had been set in motion that would change her life forever. But for now there was just the music, the moment, and the strange new feeling that perhaps her dreams weren't as impossible as she'd always believed. A week after the charity gala, Sophia sat on a bench outside the National Conservatory, staring up at its imposing stone facade. The building looked like something from another century, with tall columns and wide steps leading to massive wooden doors. Students carrying instrument cases moved in and out, some laughing together, others walking with the focused expression of musicians mentally rehearsing their pieces. "Ready?" Professor Petrov asked, appearing beside her. He had been true to his word, arranging this visit personally. Sophia nodded, though her stomach was full of butterflies. "It's beautiful," she said, gesturing at the building. "Wait until you see the inside," Professor Petrov replied with a smile. "And more importantly, until you hear it." As they climbed the steps, Sophia couldn't help thinking about how much had changed in just 1 week. News of her performance at Harrington's gala had somehow spread throughout Westlake Academy. Teachers who had barely noticed her before now stopped her in the hallways to chat about music. Students who had never spoken to her suddenly wanted to sit with her at lunch. It was strange and a little uncomfortable. Sophia wasn't used to being the center of attention, and she didn't quite trust this sudden interest. Only Mrs. Chen, the music teacher who had secretly allowed her to practice after hours, treated her exactly the same as before, with quiet encouragement and genuine care. The conservatory was established in 1897, Professor Petrov was saying as they entered the main hall. His voice echoed slightly in the high-ceilinged space. Many of the greatest musicians of the past century have studied within these walls. Sophia took in the marble floors, the grand staircase, the portraits of stern-looking composers lining the walls. It was intimidating, yet somehow felt right, as if she had stepped into a world where she instinctively belonged. "This way," Professor Petrov directed, leading her down a corridor. "I want you to hear the practice rooms first." As they walked, Sophia could hear music filtering through the doors they passed, a violin playing Bach, someone practicing scales on a flute, a cello working through what sounded like a difficult passage again and again. Each sound was crystal clear, the acoustics of the building seemingly designed to honor every note. "The auditorium is my favorite place," Professor Petrov continued, pushing open a set of double doors. Sophia gasped. The space was magnificent, row upon row of plush red seats facing a stage where a gleaming concert grand piano waited in the spotlight. "Would you like to try it?" Professor Petrov asked, noticing her gaze fixed on the piano. Sophia hesitated. "Is that allowed? I mean, for visitors?" "I'm the director," he reminded her with a wink. "I make the rules." Heart pounding, Sophia made her way to the stage. The piano was even more beautiful up close. A Bösendorfer, she realized, running her fingers lightly over the maker's name. She had read about these instruments in her borrowed music books, but never dreamed she would touch one. She sat on the bench, adjusting her position, then placed her hands on the keys. The action was so responsive it almost startled her. Closing her eyes, she began to play, not Chopin this time, but a Debussy piece, Clair de Lune, that captured the dreamlike quality of this moment. The sound was extraordinary. Each note rang out with perfect clarity, filling the vast space yet somehow intimate at the same time. Sophia lost herself in the music, barely aware that Professor Petrov had taken a seat in the front row, his expression one of deep satisfaction. When she finished, the last notes lingered in the air. She opened her eyes to find that they were no longer alone. Half a dozen people, students or faculty, she couldn't tell, had slipped in and were now applauding softly. "I think that answers the question of whether you belong here," Professor Petrov said as she returned to his side. Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment and pleasure. The rest of the tour passed in a blur of practice rooms, classrooms, and dormitories. Sophia tried to take it all in, imagining what it would be like to live and study in this place dedicated to music. By the time they returned to the main entrance, her mind was made up. "I want to audition," she told Professor Petrov firmly. "If you think I have a chance." "More than a chance," he assured her. "But you'll need to prepare properly. The audition requires 3 pieces. 1 Baroque, 1 classical, and 1 romantic or contemporary. Do you have a teacher who can help you?" Sophia thought of Mrs. Chen, who was kind but taught elementary school music, not advanced piano. "Not really," she admitted. "Then I think it's time we spoke with Mr. Harrington," Professor Petrov said. "He did offer to arrange lessons, did he not?" Sophia nodded reluctantly. She hadn't spoken to Harrington since the gala. Part of her wanted to refuse his help, to prove she could do this on her own. But the practical part of her knew that without proper instruction, her chances at the audition would be slim. "I'll call him," Professor Petrov decided, seeing her hesitation. "Sometimes pride must take a back seat to opportunity, young lady." 2 days later, Sophia found herself in a sleek office building downtown, riding an elevator to the top floor where Harrington Industries had its headquarters. Luis had insisted on coming with her, taking time off work to accompany his daughter to this unexpected meeting. "Remember," he told her as the elevator climbed, "you don't have to accept anything that doesn't feel right. We've managed just fine on our own all these years." Sophia squeezed his hand. "I know, Dad. But if this is a real chance at the conservatory, then we consider it," Luis agreed. Carefully, the elevator doors opened onto a reception area where a polished-looking woman greeted them. "Miss Martinez and Mr. Martinez? Mr. Harrington is expecting you. Please follow me." They were led through a series of open workspaces where people typed at computers or spoke quietly into headsets. Finally, they reached a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a spectacular view of the city. Harrington rose from behind a massive desk when they entered. "Sophia, Mr. Martinez, thank you for coming." He gestured to the chairs in front of his desk. "Please, sit down." Once they were seated, Harrington got straight to the point. "Professor Petrov tells me you've decided to audition for the conservatory." "Yes," Sophia confirmed. "In 6 weeks. Excellent." Harrington nodded. "I've taken the liberty of making some arrangements, which you're free to accept or decline, of course." He slid a folder across the desk. Sophia opened it and found herself looking at a detailed schedule, along with information about someone named Yelena Kozlova. "Madame Kozlova is one of the finest piano instructors in the country," Harrington explained. "She rarely takes new students, but she's agreed to work with you 3 times a week until the audition. She's also the head of the piano department at the conservatory, though she won't be part of the audition committee in your case for obvious reasons." Sophia stared at the schedule in disbelief. "These lessons, they must cost—" "That's not something you need to worry about," Harrington interrupted smoothly. Louise stiffened. "With all due respect, Mr. Harrington, we don't accept charity." "It's not charity," Harrington countered. "It's an investment. Sophia has extraordinary talent that deserves to be nurtured. Think of it as a short-term scholarship." Louise didn't look convinced. "And what do you get out of this arrangement?" The directness of the question seemed to catch Harrington off guard. He was silent for a moment, then answered with unexpected honesty. "A chance to right a wrong. Several wrongs, actually." He stood and walked to the window looking out at the city below. "When I was young, before the money, before all this, I had a music teacher who believed in me. I played violin, and apparently I was quite good. He turned back to them with a wry smile. My father thought it was a waste of time. He wanted me focused on business, on following in his footsteps, so he put an end to the lessons. I haven't picked up a violin since. Sophia found it hard to imagine Harrington as a young violinist. It seemed at odds with the calculating businessmen she had met at the gala. What happened at my home last week, Harrington continued, made me realize something. The foundation that bears my name has been supporting arts education for years, yet I've been treating it as just another tax write-off, barely paying attention to the actual students benefiting from it. Like the scholarship students at Westlake, Sophia pointed out. Exactly. Harrington nodded, which brings me to the other matter I wanted to discuss. You'll be pleased to know that the scholarship program at Westlake will continue. I've spoken with the board of the foundation, and Vivian's changes have been put on hold pending review. Louise leaned forward. So the scholarships are safe? For now, yes, Harrington confirmed. Though I can't promise there won't be further challenges. My ex-wife can be quite persistent when she wants something. Sophia closed the folder containing the lesson schedule. Why are you really doing this, Mr. Harrington? The truth. Harrington seemed surprised by her directness, but then gave a short laugh. The truth? I'm not entirely sure myself. Perhaps it's selfish, a way to feel better about my behavior at the gala. Perhaps it's genuine admiration for your talent. Or perhaps, he paused, considering. Perhaps it's because you reminded me of something I'd forgotten, that there's more to life than boardrooms and balance sheets. Sophia exchanged a glance with her father. Louise gave an almost imperceptible nod, leaving the decision to her. I'll accept the lessons, Sophia decided, but I want something in return. Harrington raised an eyebrow. Oh? Use your influence to make sure all 17 Westlake scholarships are protected. Not just for now, but permanently. Set up something that can't be changed even by your ex-wife. A slow smile spread across Harrington's face. You drive a hard bargain, Miss Martinez. I learned from my father, Sophia replied, looking at Louise with pride. Very well, Harrington agreed, extending his hand. You have a deal. As they shook hands, Sophia felt a strange mix of emotions. Excitement about the lessons, gratitude for the opportunity, but also caution. Harrington had shown a different side of himself today, but she still wasn't entirely sure she trusted him. People didn't change overnight, especially people as powerful as Richard Harrington. Madame Kozlova expects you tomorrow at 4, Harrington told her as they prepared to leave. Her studio is in the Arts District. The address is in the folder. A car will pick you up after school. I can take the bus, Sophia insisted. I don't need— The car is non-negotiable, Harrington interrupted firmly. Madame Kozlova values punctuality above all else. Trust me, you don't want to be late to your first lesson. As Sophia and Louise rode the elevator back down to the lobby, Louise put an arm around his daughter's shoulders. Are you sure about this, mija? He asked quietly. Sophia thought about the conservatory, about the feel of that magnificent piano under her fingers, about the possibility of turning her dream into reality. I'm sure about trying, she answered honestly. The rest, we'll figure out as we go. Louise nodded, his expression a mix of pride and concern. Just remember who you are, he said, no matter what happens next. Sophia leaned against her father, drawing strength from his steady presence. I will, she promised. Some things don't change. But as they stepped out of the gleaming office building and back onto the busy street, Sophia couldn't help wondering just how many things in her life were about to change, and whether she was truly ready for what lay ahead. 6 weeks felt like both an eternity and an instant. Every day after school, the sleek black car would be waiting for Sophia, whisking her away to Madame Kozlova's studio in the Arts District. The first time she'd stepped into that space, a converted loft with high ceilings and walls lined with framed concert programs, Sophia had been terrified. Madame Kozlova was nothing like she'd expected. Rather than the stern, intimidating presence Sophia had imagined, she found a small, energetic woman in her 60s with bright eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She spoke with a thick Russian accent and had no patience for excuses, but there was warmth beneath her demanding exterior. You have raw talent, she had declared, after listening to Sophia play, but talent without discipline is like having wings but never learning to fly. She had then proceeded to completely dismantle Sophia's technique, rebuilding it from the ground up with relentless precision. The lessons were exhausting, often leaving Sophia with aching fingers and a spinning head. Madame Kozlova pushed her harder than anyone ever had, demanding perfection in every note, every phrase, every emotional nuance. There were days when Sophia left the studio fighting back tears, convinced she would never be good enough for the conservatory. But there were also moments of breakthrough, when a difficult passage suddenly clicked into place, when her hands found a new freedom on the keys, when Madame Kozlova's rare good, very good, felt like the highest praise imaginable. At home, Sophia practiced on a new piano that had mysteriously appeared in their apartment one day. Louise had initially refused the delivery, but the movers had been persistent, explaining that the instrument was on loan from the conservatory for students preparing for auditions. It wasn't the truth, of course. Sophia suspected Harrington's hand in the arrangement, but it was framed in a way that allowed her father to accept it without compromising his principles. Now, on the morning of the audition, Sophia sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the carefully pressed outfit hanging on her closet door, a simple black dress, modest but elegant, borrowed from Mrs. Chen, who was about Sophia's size. Beside it hung the necklace that had belonged to her mother, a small silver pendant with a tiny pearl at its center, the only piece of jewelry Sophia owned. "Mija?" Louise knocked softly before opening the door. "You're up early?" "Couldn't sleep," Sophia admitted. Louise sat beside her on the bed, the mattress dipping slightly under his weight. "Nervous?" Sophia nodded. "What if I mess up? What if all this was for nothing?" "It's never for nothing," Louise said gently. "These past weeks, the things you've learned, the way you've grown, that belongs to you now, no matter what happens today." Sophia leaned against her father's shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "When did you get so wise?" Louise chuckled. "I've had 17 years of practice with a very smart daughter." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Your mother would be so proud of you today, just as I am." Sophia felt the familiar pang that always came with mentions of her mother, not the sharp grief of a recent loss, but the dull ache of absence, of never having known the woman whose blood ran in her veins, whose music somehow lived in her fingers. "I wish she could be there," Sophia whispered. "She is," Louise assured her, "in every note you play." Later that morning, as the now familiar black car pulled up outside their apartment building, Sophia was surprised to see Lena, Harrington's sister, emerge from the back seat. "Hope you don't mind the company," Lena greeted her with a warm smile. "I thought you might want some moral support today." Sophia returned the smile gratefully. Over the past weeks, Lena had become an unexpected ally, occasionally sitting in on her lessons with Madame Kozlova and offering words of encouragement when the teacher's demands seemed impossible to meet. "Where's Dad?" Sophia asked, looking around for Louise, who had gone to get the car warmed up. "Already in the front seat," Lena explained. "I think he and our driver are debating the merits of various engine types." The drive to the conservatory passed in a blur of last-minute mental rehearsal. Sophia ran through her pieces in her head: Bach's Prelude in C minor, Mozart's Sonata in C major, and Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. Madame Kozlova had helped her select these works to showcase different aspects of her playing: technical precision, classical structure, and emotional depth. The conservatory looked different today, more imposing, its stone facade seeming to watch her with judging eyes as she climbed the steps. Inside, the main hall was filled with other young musicians, some pacing nervously, others sitting perfectly still with expressions of intense concentration. "Registration is this way." Lena guided her toward a table where officials were checking in candidates. After signing in and receiving her audition time, 11:45 a.m., just over an hour away, Sophia found a quiet corner to wait. Louise sat beside her, silent but supportive, while Lena went to find coffee for all of them. "Sophia?" She looked up to see Professor Petrov approaching, his face breaking into a smile when their eyes met. "I just wanted to wish you luck," he said, "though I'm sure you won't need it. Madame Kozlova has told me about your progress." Sophia felt a flutter of hope. "She has?" Professor Petrov nodded. "She's not easily impressed, are you, Lena? The fact that she's spoken of you at all is significant." He glanced at his watch. "I should go. I'm not on your panel today. Conflict of interest? You understand, but I'll be thinking of you." As he walked away, Sophia noticed a familiar figure standing near the entrance: Richard Harrington. looking somewhat out of place among the music students in his perfectly tailored suit. "I didn't know he was coming," Sophia murmured to her father. Louise followed her gaze. "He called yesterday, asked if it would be all right." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "And you said yes?" "I said it wasn't my decision to make." Louise shrugged. "He's invested a lot in your success, Sophia, not just money." Before Sophia could respond, her name was called. A stern-faced woman with a clipboard was beckoning her toward the auditorium doors. "That's at least 20 minutes early," Sophia protested, panic rising in her chest. "One of the candidates failed to appear," the woman explained impatiently. "We're moving up the schedule." Sophia felt her heart racing. She wasn't ready. She needed those 20 minutes to collect herself, to prepare mentally. "You can do this," Louise told her, squeezing her hand. "Remember everything you've worked for." Taking a deep breath, Sophia followed the woman through the doors and onto the now familiar stage. The auditorium looked different today. Instead of being empty as it had been during her tour with Professor Petrov, the first few rows were filled with people. A panel of 5 judges sat at a table directly in front of the stage, their expressions revealing nothing. "Sofia Martinez?" one of them asked. A woman with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. "You may begin when ready. We'll hear the Bach first." Sophia approached the piano, adjusting the bench to her height. As she sat down, she felt a momentary wave of doubt. The instrument before her, another magnificent Bösendorfer, suddenly seemed like a stranger, its keys a challenge rather than an invitation. She placed her hands on the keyboard, took a deep breath, and began to play. The first few notes came out unsteady, her fingers stiff with nerves. Sophia felt a flash of panic. This wasn't how she'd practiced, wasn't what Madame Kozlova had taught her. For a terrifying moment, she thought she might forget the piece entirely. Then, through the fog of anxiety, she remembered her father's words from earlier that morning. "These past weeks, the things you've learned, the way you've grown, that belongs to you now." Sophia closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. When she opened them again, the piano was once more a friend, the music a conversation rather than a test. Her fingers found their confidence, and the Bach prelude began to flow with the precise, mathematical beauty it required. By the time she reached the Mozart sonata, Sophia had forgotten the judges, the stakes, even the audition itself. There was only the music, speaking through her as it had that night at Harrington's gala. The Chopin Nocturne, her final piece, rose and fell like waves, carrying with it all the emotion of the past weeks. The fear, the hope, the determination, and finally, the joy of creation. When the last note faded away, Sophia sat motionless for a moment, slowly returning to the reality of the auditorium, the judges, the audition. "Thank you, Miss Martinez," the silver-haired judge said, making a note on her sheet. "The results will be posted within 3 days. You may go." Outside the auditorium, Luis was waiting, his face anxious. "How was it?" he asked. "I don't know," Sophia admitted honestly. "At first I was so nervous, but then it felt right." She looked around. "Where's Lena?" "She and her brother stepped out to take a call," Luis explained. "Something about an emergency board meeting." Sophia nodded, too drained to feel much curiosity about Harrington's business affairs. "Can we go home now?" "Of course," Luis agreed, putting an arm around her shoulders. "You must be exhausted." The next 3 days were the longest of Sophia's life. She tried to distract herself with schoolwork, with practice, with helping her father around the apartment, but her mind kept returning to the audition, replaying every note, wondering if she could have done better. When the email finally arrived, a simple message requesting her presence at the conservatory the following afternoon, Sophia stared at her phone screen, unable to tell if this was good news or bad. "They want to see me in person," she told her father, her voice tight with anxiety. "Why wouldn't they just send the results?" "Perhaps it's standard procedure," Louise suggested, though he looked worried too. The black car came for her one final time the next day, carrying Sophia and Louise back to the conservatory. This time there was no Lena, no Harrington, just father and daughter, facing whatever came next together. Professor Petrov was waiting for them in the main hall, his expression unreadable. "Thank you for coming," he said formally. "Please follow me." He led them not to his office as Sophia had expected, but to a small recital hall she hadn't seen before. When he opened the door, Sophia was startled to find the room filled with people, the audition judges, Madame Kozlova, several students she recognized from her visits. And in the back row, Richard and Lena Harrington. What's happening? Sophia whispered to her father, who looked equally confused. Professor Petrov guided them to seats in the front row, then took his place at a small podium. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, it is my pleasure to introduce this year's recipient of the Elena Bartoli Full Scholarship to the National Conservatory, Sophia Martinez. For a moment, the words didn't register. Then Sophia felt her father's hand grip hers tightly, heard his sharp intake of breath. Sophia, Professor Petrov continued, turning to address her directly, your audition was unanimously selected by our panel as the finest of this year's candidates. We would be honored to welcome you as a student this fall. The room erupted in applause. Sophia sat frozen, unable to process what she was hearing. She had done it. She had actually done it. As people came forward to congratulate her, Sophia found herself enveloped in her father's embrace, felt the dampness of tears against her cheek. Whether his or her own, she couldn't tell. Over his shoulder, she caught Harrington's eye. The billionaire gave her a small nod of acknowledgement, a gesture somehow more meaningful than any grand speech could have been. Sophia nodded back, a silent understanding passing between them, an unexpected journey that had begun with mockery and ended with respect. Later, as Sophia stood on the steps of the conservatory, her future stretching before her like an unwritten score, she thought about the strange twists of fate that had led her here, a charity gala she'd never expected to attend, a moment of humiliation transformed into triumph, a billionaire's cruelty turned to support. Ready to go home? Luis asked, standing beside her. Sophia looked up at the building that would soon become a second home, then back at her father, her first and most faithful supporter. Yes, she said, slipping her hand into his. For now, the path ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, moments of doubt. But Sophia Martinez, the janitor's daughter who had once been mocked for her circumstances, would face them all with the same quiet determination that had brought her to this moment. And she would play on, her music touching hearts, changing lives, and perhaps most importantly, remaining true to the simple melody that had started it all. A tune played on a rescued keyboard in a modest apartment, guided by a father's love and a daughter's dream.